how to build custom blocks for the new UW theme 2.0. Oh, thanks, Sarah. We are going to get started here. Just a quick reminder, if you could keep your microphone muted until we ask for questions, and we'll do questions at the end. So yeah, I'm going to pass it off to Andrea and Nate, who are going to introduce themselves.
Nate Finch appears in a tile.
Hey y'all, welcome to how to build custom blocks for the new UW Theme 2.0. Just to quick introduce ourselves here, see if I can, there we go. I'm Nate Finch. I'm an application architect in the Office of Strategic Communication.
And I'm Andrea Roning. I'm a front-end web developer with WhiskWeb.
Andrea briefly appears.
And we are part of the UW theme team. If you came to our session yesterday, you saw this slide, but we had a ton of awesome teamwork going on with folks from WhiskWeb, with folks from the digital strategy team, folks from the Center for User Experience. Shout out Leah Bowers always, and folks from the digital or the creative strategy team, as well as other supporting developers, UX and web designers, and everything. So thank you everybody who has been a part of this project from day one. Really appreciate it and couldn't have done it without y'all.
Minifig photo.
So blocks now are kind of the building blocks of your WordPress website. We have a lot of WordPress core blocks that are available. There are a lot of patterns now in the UW Theme 2.0 that are available for you to just use. You can just go through the pattern selector and just go through and pick those out and just plop a whole bunch of blocks on your page that already have great settings for them and are ready to go. So you can have some really nice looking pages. We also have third-party plugins like Gravity Forms that are available for your website and specifically on WhiskWeb. And for this talk specifically, we're looking at how you can build your own custom blocks, right? And how we've built the custom blocks that are available for the UW Theme 2.0. So we made a lot of decisions. I've forgotten all the decisions that we've made in the past here, but we made a lot of decisions going forward on all these blocks. So we wanted all these blocks in the UW Theme 2.0 to be campus branded so that you could use different font variables and stuff, different CSS variables that are available now for fonts, colors, spacing, stuff like that. But we wanted to have that ready to go for you out of the box. We decided to use dynamic blocks instead of static blocks, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but those use PHP to render instead of being pre-rendered on save in the block editor. And we wanted to make sure that blocks were very easy to use for non-technical editors. So the majority of the people that are going to be using this are most likely not developers, right? So even though you might be a developer coming to this talk to see how we're developing custom blocks, most of the people that are using these blocks are non-technical. And that's great because these blocks are just point and click. You can just put them in there and you're ready to go, right? We wanted to leverage WordPress core as much as possible. So even though we do have a whole suite of custom blocks, we really tried to use what WordPress already shipped with as far as blocks go, and even as far as libraries go. So like the interactivity API is a library that ships with WordPress core. So instead of bringing in something else to use, we wanted to just leverage what WordPress is already shipping. We also decided not to use ACF or other block builders. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But if you're interested in moving away from ACF and some more decisions around that, I'm giving a talk later today. You're more than welcome to come too. But again, because ACF is a dependency that's not part of WordPress core, we wanted to move away from that.
The photo shows a template web page.
So we learned pretty early that you may not need a custom block for your theme, and there's a lot you can do to adapt WordPress core blocks. For example, we wanted a block style variation to add that red mini bar above the heading block. And here on this screenshot, if it's maybe pretty small, but there are two buttons, one for default and one for mini bar. We also limited the text colors to a very small palette, and we were able to do that using theme.json, which is built into WordPress core. And then to this heading block, we also added a toggle to be able to remove a link underline from headings. And this can be nice in a card pattern or in other cases where a link underline could make a heading difficult to read. And all of this can be done by adapting a core WordPress block.
Sample code lies next to page layouts.
So patterns are another great way to use WordPress core blocks, and the UW theme provides multiple patterns to help folks get started with page design. As a developer, these were really easy to add to the theme by adding pattern PHP files. So on the right, there's an example of a theme pattern. You can see there's a PHP comment block at the top that gives some information about the pattern name and the categories. And then you can see this like HTML comment blob. It looks real funny if you haven't looked at WordPress code before, but this is kind of the code that gets saved to the database behind the scenes. It all gets stripped out in the front end, which is nice. But this is how WordPress kind of communicates to the editor what styles get applied, and we're able to template these out in our patterns pretty easily from a developer standpoint. One pattern that I'll call out is this alternating content layout. This is a common element where there's an image on, the right of some of the text, and then the row below it has the like image and text swap. So the image becomes on the left of the text. And in the classic UW theme, you needed to kind of fill out an ACF, Advanced Custom Field style form to be able to create this element, and you couldn't really see how it looked until you pressed publish. But in the new theme, we're able to do this with a pattern, and you can kind of really get what you see is what you get on the editor, and it's a lot easier to make this design.
Good cases for a custom block.
All right, so we did find some good reasons to build our own custom blocks, though. One good reason is if you have interactive elements that you want to use JavaScript for. So carousels and tabs are a couple of examples of that. So another good reason is if you're pulling in data from an API. We do this to pull in events from today.wisc.edu, which is our central campus calendar, and we use an API to fetch that data, and then you can display events on your own website. And sometimes if you build a custom block, you get greater control over the look and feel or the HTML structure, and that might be its own reason to build a custom block. You can add classes to kind of the outer wrapper that can't be removed, and you can more easily limit what's entered into that block.
Two versions of quote blocks.
So one good case of this kind of design reason to do it is the quote block. WordPress core ships with two different quote blocks. There is a pull quote block and there is a regular quote block. And on the left, you can see examples of this, and they're styled with pink and purple, but they're two separate blocks. But then on the right, you can see the example of the UW Theme 2.0 custom quote block. So it's easy to switch between the pull quote and the block quote styles with the buttons. And then there are some limited styling options that meet the brand guidelines. So you can kind of change, the style of the block. You can left align things. You can turn the citation field on and off. But there are limited options to be able to style this block so that it looks like it's part of the UW brand.
The link to documentation lies toward bottom right.
So I would recommend checking out the documentation site for great information about our custom blocks, and a huge shout out to Ketter Joyner and Matt Goins and the whole team who contributes to making this great content. I love this site. I'm so glad that we have this.
The photo shows a page builder.
So one development difference when you're starting with a custom block is that instead of removing unwanted settings like you're doing with the WordPress core block, you're starting with 0 settings and building up from there. So the example on this screen is the back to top block, and there are just a few options on this block that we added. It's a simple block and it doesn't have a lot of room for customization. So on the block toolbar, which is the toolbar that you can see when you have a block selected, it usually appears right above that block. You can see that there's an option to change the block alignment, which is how you make the whole block wider, or you can change the text alignment, which is how you could perhaps center the text within the block. And then on the right-hand panel, this is the block settings panel, there is a dimensions panel where you can change top and bottom margins, but That's it. We removed all, or we didn't add all the other bells and whistles that come with a lot of WordPress core blocks.
The Setup Resources slide has links.
All right. So if you haven't tried local block development before, so you build it locally and then you can ship it. These are the things that you're going to need for your local setup. You're going to need some kind of local environment here, so you can use local WP. You can use whatever if you have something like Laravel Herd, or if you're still using VVV, awesome, or Orlando, whatever, right? You can use MAMP, XAMPP, WAMP, whatever. So any of the local development environments, as long as you're able to serve a WordPress site, will be good. The other thing you're going to need is Node.js, and I think pretty much everybody on the team, almost everybody, uses Node Version Manager for switching between node versions. And this is really good if you have a block that you're looking at that's an open source block, you're pulling it in, and it requires a different node version than maybe what we have locked to, then you can easily switch between node versions with that. And then WordPress released something called WP Create Block. A while ago, there was something like Create Guten Block and everything, but now WordPress core has this WP Create Block. It comes with a bunch of WordPress scripts for building blocks and linting and formatting and stuff like that. But the way that you would use that is to run, because you have Node installed, you can run npx and then this at WordPress/create block at latest, and then you would name whatever block you're trying to create. So in this case, like UW blocks, for example. And if you are using like a dynamic block, you would put in like this variant dynamic, most likely. So when we were creating new blocks, this is basically what we did. So the first question that you're going to need to ask yourself if you're building blocks is, do I need this block to be static or dynamic? And there's a few differences here that aren't very apparent at first. But for static blocks, you have markup that is known when the page is saved. So basically what that means is that whatever you see in the editor, that's already being rendered as HTML. And so if you change something, you type it out, as in like the paragraph block or the heading block, then that HTML is already known and it can be saved as such, right? So when the page loads on the front end, you don't actually need to check and see, well, what does the paragraph or what does the heading block say, right? You already know, so those can be saved to the database as pre-rendered HTML. Dynamic blocks, on the other hand, markup and exact content are not known when the page is saved. And so in that sense, markup is built on the fly, just like all traditional PHP templates, right? It's going and getting kind of that little, whether it's post meta or post content or something like that. And it's pulling that out of the database when the page is being built, and then rendering that on the fly. So an example of that would be like the site title block. So that could be changed or filtered through different pages if you wanted to. But the idea there is that like the site title block, you want to have it rendered when the page is being displayed. You don't necessarily want it to be static. So there are plenty of pros for doing static blocks. A couple of those are that it's more performant, and that the markup is already in the database there. So like I said, if you don't have to make like basically a database query and compute for that, you already have the markup, it can just be returned. However, the big con that we just couldn't get past for sure was that markup, when you change the markup, so if you're going through and you're developing these blocks, you're learning how to use local, or you're learning how to develop these blocks, you're going to make changes, right? The problem is that anytime you make a change in the markup, and we'll look at some files and stuff later, but the markup changes actually cause the block to error out, because if you're saving that block, then it already has what it expects, and so it'll check against that and validate it. But then, if you've changed the markup, then the block will get this error that it contains invalid content, and you have to redo everything. So you can imagine, we're building these blocks and we make a change to the markup and then ship that out to thousands of sites. And then all of a sudden people get these errors. We were like, we cannot have that. So we moved over to using static blocks, or at least looking at static blocks, right? So the pros of static blocks are that we don't get these deprecation errors, and then we can iterate more quickly on the markup. And since we're working as a team, cross department team and stuff like that, we have a lot of people kind of getting in and out and making these changes and stuff like that. While it might be slightly less performant, it definitely wasn't a big enough hit for us. So we decided to go with dynamic blocks again because we were able to quickly iterate. We were able to share and test these across our team, and we didn't really have to worry about future deprecation notices and stuff like that.
Articles links.
We will have a way to share this as well, but there are some really good articles on why you would use one versus the other and stuff like that, and y'all can follow these links later. The other thing that you're going to need to figure out is if you need to use attributes or post meta, if you have data that you're trying to save for that particular block. So the main difference is that attributes store data within the main post content of the HTML. And let me just go back a few slides here to this pattern. You can see over here in the HTML comment, you have like a WP group, and then you have this curly bracket open, and all of this information in this comment is there. And this is where those attribute data are being stored. They're being stored in the HTML comment metadata. So really interesting choice there, but that is there. So then that data is only specific to that block instance and really can't be queried. I have can't in quotes because you could query it if you wanted to, but it's not a very efficient query. So it's good for block styling and other configuration, true, false, like on, off kind of stuff. And blocks that use that are the UW link block and the UW quote block and the UW accordion block. So these are blocks where, all the information is contained within that block. If you need to have stuff that can be queried across different blocks or outside of the block, then you're going to want to use post meta. And so that stuff traditionally, just like advanced custom fields, is stored in the post meta table. And again, like I said, that can be queried across blocks. So this is really good for structured data around a post type. So for our staff or event post types that we have, we're using post meta, and that allows all of that information to be displayed in like a staff listing. So this post meta are things like their name, their position, title, whatever, credentials, all that kind of stuff is all stored in the post meta.
Lists.
So again, here are just a list of blocks and stuff that we have for attributes and post meta.
File structure of a block link.
So you could build a separate plugin for each custom block you use on your site, and there are some advantages to this too. Like if you have a multi-site, you can enable or disable the plugin based on the site needs to use each and every block. However, we decided to group 12 of our blocks together into a multi-block plugin so they can share code, such as SVG icons between blocks. It's also nice to have fewer plugins to keep track of and keep up to date. So here is a link. I'll show this in chat in a little bit, but here's a link to the file structure documentation from WordPress core that walks through common files that you'll see in a single block plugin.
File structure and code.
And then, so this screen here is the common file structure that you would see for a single block plugin. This is just a screenshot of the VS Code editor. And then, if you've done local or plugin development before, the setup will probably look a little bit familiar. The file that's open here is the main plugin entry point PHP file, and the comment block at the top adds the information you'll see on the admin plugins page. Then below that, we're using the init function to point to where the block's information is in the build directory. And then on the left, you'll see the SRC or source directory, and this is expanded to show the different files that can be edited. This example has a render PHP file because it's using dynamic block, or it is a dynamic block, so it's using PHP to calculate the date on the published page. However, it also has the edit date.js, so it's using JavaScript to calculate the date in the editor. So this is one of those gotchas, is that when you do block development is often you end up coding things twice because they need to be coded for both the front end and the editor.
Magnified code.
And then our next slide here, you can see a multi-block plugin screenshot example. There are multiple block folders within the source directory. And because this is a multi-block plugin with UW Theme 2.0, we can reuse that SVG code in multiple places by importing that code into our block files. So here's an example of the UW arrow icon that is used in the UW single link block, and it's used through an import. And if you're using the create block package, the no plugin flag can help you create a block within an existing plugin.
The heading of the new slide says Block Plugins for the UW Theme 2.0. Nate reappears.
Unmute myself there. So these are the block plugins that are available for the UW Theme 2.0. We currently have the theme blocks plugin, the people plugin, events, and embed blocks. And these have all of these features that go along with it. Some of these are related to custom post types and everything, but these are all going to be available for you to use.
Example links.
And then if you are looking to do some different, whether you're trying to learn how to do this, there's some really good block plugin examples that WordPress has. There's a copyright block tutorial, which we just saw actually a screenshot of. There's also fundamentals of block development, which is a course on learn.wordpress.org. And then a great GitHub repository of 30 different blocks and examples on how to use different blocks and everything. So
Text. Building out your block. Andrea reappears.
All right, next we'll cover just some quick tips and tricks for custom blocks.
Code begins with import.
So when you're building out your blocks user interface, you can utilize the WordPress component library for things like buttons, toggles, and other elements. Here's an example of importing the button component from WordPress core, and we're using it in the editor to provide a button to easily add an accordion item. It's just a little bit of React to make this happen. When we were first getting started on this whole project, I was happy to know that I did not need to be like an expert in React. I just needed a baseline knowledge. And there's a lot of help in the WordPress community to get started.
Links.
So here's some more documentation that we reference a lot. There's the component reference in WordPress docs, and then there's a storybook where you can see the UI styles in action, super helpful. And then there's a design system that's available in Figma for folks who like to prototype there.
Code snippets.
So UW Theme 2.0 uses theme.json to create CSS variables for colors. And on the left, you can see what the theme.json looks like. And then on the right, you can see the CSS variables that were created. And we can now use these variables throughout the theme and our plugins. And if you went to our talk yesterday, Josh Chilkus talked about this a little bit, how the best thing about variables is that they are variable. On the next slide, you can see where we are changing the CSS variables a bit, where if there's a button on the editor UI that appears on a group that has a dark background, it needs a different color.
Banner image.
The next slide is where we'll show that this button changes from, it would normally have a transparent background, but now because we've changed that variable, it has a white background. So it is accessible and easy to read when it's on that dark group background as well. So the class has stayed the same, but the CSS variable was updated behind the scenes. And yeah, CSS variables have just been a joy to work with.
Documentation link.
Another thing that's been awesome to use and work with has been something called the Interactivity API. There's a link to the documentation here. I talked about this a little bit yesterday, but essentially, like, this Interactivity API is a library that you can pull in and allow the front end to be more reactive. Kind of like React is built with Preact, but the idea is that you might not need to like build all this stuff out. So I originally built out the accordion blocks in just like vanilla JS, but we introduced the Interactivity API and we went down from like 400 lines of code or something to like 91 very readable lines of code, and that was awesome. It makes things way easier to maintain and and reason about and stuff like that. So if you're doing something that is interactive, opening, closing, moving things around, we use the Interactivity API in our accordions and tabs. Highly recommend it.
File arrangement.
The UW people listing is completely different kind of beast. This is actually like a full-on React app. So we have you can see here in the screenshot on the right, we have components that are just in the admin. And then we also have components that are in the admin block and also on the front end. And we essentially serve up the same React app in the admin in the block editor as we do on the front end. So there's a big difference here between like doing like an accordion block like this and then like this full-on people listing block where you're going through different, taxonomies and different list types and all sorts of stuff and trying to style images and like having images or not, linking, all that kind of stuff. So we also have like, sorting, caching, URL param tracking and stuff like that going through this. So it's a pretty solid app, but it is just literally a React app that's kind of just slammed into WordPress there.
Documentation site.
We are making improvements to the themes and blocks over time, and if your site is hosted on WhiskWeb, you'll automatically be updated to the latest versions. And if you self-host the theme, you can download the theme and plugins from the UW theme documentation site. There's a link that we'll share in this presentation, and I'll drop a link in chat to that as well.
3 lines of code.
For StratCom, we actually manage plugins a little differently, and you might do this in your department. We do this through Composer, so we're able to just bump the version in Composer and then run an update and deploy all that. So it makes it really easy to go ahead and get all those changes out there.
Links.
Just a few resources to end here. There's a Kaltura block development migration playlist that I made. Highly recommend looking at that, going a lot more into detail in that on building blocks and customizations and how to think through those things. There's like hours of content on there for you to enjoy. There's also learn.wordpress, which I referenced before, like developing your first block and intermediate theme developer. These are courses on Learn WordPress. And then there's also an article that I wrote that's on the WordPress developer blog about setting up a multi-block plugin and everything there. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or I think come off mute. I think that is also possible. I know we've got like 37 seconds or whatever, 3 minutes. So happy to answer any questions. And if there were any, links that we missed, feel free to bug Andrea about it.
The last slide reads, questions? Mandy Morrow reappears in the tile in the upper right.
We got a question in the chat. If one wanted to add some custom fields to the UW people listing, what would be a good way to go about that?
That is a great question there, Dan. I think that one, reach out to us, like specifically what you're looking for. There are the same kind of hooks and filters available in WordPress React, so we could add the ability for you to do that and everything. So yeah, Andrea just shared a link to the feature request board there. And yeah, fill out feature requests and let us know what you're looking for and all that. So great question.
The feature request board is great too because it helps us gauge if there is a lot of support for a feature that people are asking for. So if lots of people are looking for the same thing, it helps us move it up on priority.
Yeah, get those upvotes.
Any other questions that folks have?
And if you all have any other questions after this, feel free to ping us, feature request board, whatever. We're available. We love chatting about all this stuff. So yeah, just holler.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Andrea and Nate. And we'll give you all a minute back in your day. Next sessions start at, I believe, 9:40.
Thank you. And thank you to our sign language interpreters as well.
Yes, nice work.
Nate gives a double thumbs up. His tile takes over the presentation. Guitars, drums, and a mandolin rest behind him.